Concern about an escalation of military action by India and Pakistan is growing as the two countries trade accusations and threats following airstrikes they carried out in the disputed Kashmir region. Addressing those fears, Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan has called for dialogue with India.
Better sense must prevail. Let's solve this problem through dialogue.
Pakistan said on Wednesday its Air Force downed 2 Indian fighter jets. Khan said in a televised address the same day that was an act of self-defense. He said no sovereign nation can tolerate a foreign country engaging in military action within its territory. India's foreign ministry issued a statement demanding the swift return of a pilot of one of the downed jets, whom Pakistan says it has detained. Ministry officials said they have submitted to Pakistan documents proving that an Islamic extremist group was involved in the February 14th suicide attack in Kashmir that killed over 40 Indian soldiers and triggered the current tensions. They say they called on Pakistan to take immediate, concrete and verifiable action against terrorism in territory under its control. Pakistan's military says the 2 Indian fighters it shot down were flying inside its airspace on Wednesday morning. They say one jet crashed on the Pakistani side of the de facto border and the other on the Indian side. Meanwhile, India says Pakistani jets entered its airspace that morning, but were intercepted and one was shot down. It also says one of its fighters was lost in that engagement. The international community, including the United States, is urging the two countries to exercise restraint.
Okay, other news now. In the past 24 hours, there's been a major escalation of tension between India and Pakistan, 2 nuclear powers with a long history of hostility. Pakistan says it's shot down 2 Indian planes that were involved in the bombing of alleged terror targets inside Pakistan. They've paraded one of the pilots that was captured. India has acknowledged losing 1 plane, but said it also shot down a Pakistani jet. The attacks are linked to a suicide car bombing 2 weeks ago inside Indian-administered Kashmir, which killed at least 42 Indian soldiers.
The attacks are linked to a suicide car bombing 2 weeks ago inside Indian-administered Kashmir, which killed at least 42 Indian soldiers. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan has called for a responsible approach, warning the two sides can't afford miscalculations. Secunda Kamani has this report.
These are Pakistani soldiers apparently leading away a downed Indian pilot with an angry crowd behind them. The Pakistani military says his plane was shot down this morning as India scrambled to respond to Pakistani strikes across the border in the disputed region of Kashmir. Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan addressed the nation, saying the military force was a response to earlier Indian aggression, but also calling for dialogue.
We should be thinking, if this escalates, where will it lead? It will neither be in my control, nor in the control of the Indian Prime Minister. That is why, once again, I'm offering talks.
This is the most dangerous confrontation between the two countries in nearly 20 years. It began 2 weeks ago when a Pakistan-based militant group killed 40 Indian soldiers. Pakistan insisted the attack had nothing to do with them. But yesterday, Indian jets crossed into Pakistan, targeting, Indian officials claim, a militant training camp. Local residents say they only hit a forest. Today, Pakistan struck back with an air raid in India, shooting down at least 1 Indian fighter jet responding to it. At a press conference by the Pakistani military, I asked if their actions were bringing the countries to the brink of war.
We engaged a nearby open space where there was no human life or no military post, meaning thereby that we deliberately avoided the escalation.
Indian officials, though, held their own press conference, making their own claims.
The Pakistan Air Force was detected and the Indian Air Force responded instantly. In that aerial engagement, 1 Pakistan Air Force fighter aircraft was shot down.
Last night, both sides accused the other of causing casualties in cross-border shelling. The fear now is that the violence could further escalate.
That was Secunda Kamani reporting for us. I'm joined now in the studio by Alyssa Ayres, who served in the US State Department covering South Asia. She's now a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. Alyssa, thanks very much for coming in. How alarming is this development?
It's definitely alarming. Is it a 5-alarm fire? Well, not yet. The fact that there is the possibility that it could head in that direction is what I think calls for attention to the region and ramping up a real focus on this potential crisis.
India hasn't used airstrikes in Pakistan since, what, 1971?
Since 1971, and of course that was at a time when neither country had nuclear weapons.
And you're getting to my second point. They now do. Is the onus on Pakistan or on India at this point to try and de-escalate? And will they?
Yeah, I think both countries need to find avenues for de-escalation. I think Pakistan is the country that should take the first step, by sending back the Indian Air Force pilot who is in their custody, and B, taking more sufficient steps within their country to demonstrate that they really are going to crack down on the UN-designated terrorist groups that are essentially operating openly.
But Alyssa, how much influence does Imran Khan, the Prime Minister in Pakistan, have over the Pakistani military?
Isn't that always the question? How much influence does a civilian elected leader have in Pakistan? I think that is a real challenge in Pakistan, where the military certainly have a very strong control of national security. But he should try. If he really wants to make good on his demonstrations of seeking a peaceful region, then he should at least try.
It's a fast-moving situation. I'm sure there's some very active conversations going on in Geneva and New York tonight. But the Pakistanis have called a meeting of the National Command Authority. What do they do?
The National Command Authority is the body within Pakistan that manages command and control of their nuclear arsenal. So you can see why it would be a concern that they decided it was time to call a meeting of the NCA. I think that's why international observers are very concerned about this.
Most countries have a no first-use nuclear policy. Is Pakistan signatory to that?
Pakistan does not have a no first-use policy, and not only that, it has what most outside experts believe to be the fastest-growing nuclear arsenal on the planet, and it also has developed tactical or battlefield nuclear weapons. So there are a lot of questions about to what extent there's control over the entirety of its arsenal, when they might decide to use one. I mean, that is why everybody is so worried about this. At what point does a country that has not demonstrated responsibility for peace and security in the region, again, the problem of all these terrorist groups, would they decide to go nuclear?
And on the Indian side, of course, domestic pressures as well, with elections coming up, and the issue of terrorists inside Indian administered Kashmir being a factor in those elections. Presumably there's pressure on the Indian government as well to be tough in this situation.
There's enormous pressure on the Indian government. I think you have Prime Minister Modi, who comes from a Hindu nationalist organization, the BJP. He has a base that wants to see him be tough on Pakistan. But I do have to say, we've seen so many terrorist attacks over the years that have been traced back to groups operating from within Pakistan that I think an Indian Prime Minister of any party, from any background, would feel tremendous pressure at this time, certainly after what happened on February 14th, that terrorist attack in Pulwama.
Okay, Alyssa Ayres, thanks very much for coming in to join us. We'll be watching that situation. This is, as you say, Christian, one of those situations that's moving very fast with potentially big consequences on both sides and a lot of domestic politics on both sides of that as well. Okay.